Okay, sounds great. So we're in our reading packet today on page 40. We're at another one of those assessments, which means that I can't give you the answers for these. So it would be just like as if you were taking a test in class. So what I am going to do is, just like I always do, I'm going to read through the stories for you, and then I will explain in depth each of the questions. So it's not too long of an assessment today. It's just page 40 through 43, and only 42 and 43 have questions on them because you have to read two stories because we're going off what we did last week, which was all about comparing and contrasting historical fiction and just um, historical pieces, I guess you would say. So the first story we're reading here is from The Progress of 50 Years by Lucy Stone. It says, this is just explaining to us who Lucy Stone is, so this isn't part of the actual story, but it says, Lucy Stone was a well-known suffragist in the women's rights movement. Forced to pay for her own education, she was the first woman from Massachusetts to earn a college degree and gain fame for not changing her name after marrying Henry Blackwell in 1855. Stone continued to fight for equality for women throughout her career. The following is an excerpt from her last public speech presented to the Congress of Women at the World's Fair in 1893. So this is going to be our piece of just historical nonfiction, which is where everything is just true, because it's a speech that she gave. So there's no fiction or made up element to this story. So it says 50 years ago, the legal injustice imposed upon women was appalling. Wives, widows, and mothers seemed to have been hunted out by the law on purpose to see how many ways they could be wronged and made helpless. A wife by her marriage lost all right to any personal property she might have. The income of her land went to her husband, so that she was made absolutely penniless. If a woman earned a dollar by scrubbing, her husband had a right to take the dollar. It was his dollar. If a woman wrote a book, the copyright of the same belonged to her husband and not to her. The law counted out in many states how many cups and saucers, spoons and knives and chairs a widow might have had when her husband died. I have seen many a widow who took the cups she had bought before she was married and bought them again after her husband died, so as to have them legally. The law gave no right to married women to any legal existence at all. Her legal existence was suspended during marriage. She could neither sue or be sued. If she had a child born alive, the law gave her husband the use of all her real estate as long as he should live, and called it by the pleasant name of the estate by courtesy. When the husband died, the law gave the widow the use of 1/3 of the real estate belonging to him, and it was called widow's encumbrance. While the law dealt thus with her regard to her property, it dealt still more hardly with her in regard to her children. No married mother could have any right to her child, and in most states of the Union that is law today. But the laws in regard to personal and property rights of women have greatly changed and improved, and we are very grateful to the men who have done it. We have not only gained in fact that the laws are modified, women have acquired a certain amount of political power. We have now in 20 states school suffrage for women. 40 years ago, there was but one. Kentucky allowed widows with children of school age to vote on school questions. We have also municipal suffrage for women in Kansas and full suffrage in Wyoming, a state larger than all New England. The last half-century has gained for women the right to the highest education and entrance to all professions and occupations, or nearly all. As a result, we have women's clubs, the Women's Congress, women's educational and industrial unions, the Moral Education Society, the Women's Relief Corps, police matrons, colleges for women and coeducational colleges in the Harvard Annex, medical schools and medical societies open to women, women's hospitals, women as power in the press, authors, women artists, women's benefit societies and helping hand societies, women school supervisors and factory inspectors and prison inspectors, women on state boards of charity, the International Council of Women, the Women's National Council, and last but not least, the Board of Lady Managers. And not one of these things was allowed women 50 years ago, except the opening at Oberlin. By what toil and fatigue and patience and strife and the beautiful law of growth has this all been wrought? This these things have not come of themselves. They could not have occurred except as the great movement for women has brought them out and about. They are part of the eternal order, and they have come to stay. Now all we need is to continue to speak the truth fearlessly, and we shall add to our number those who will turn the scale to the side of equal and full justice in all things. Now, the next one is A Widow's Burden, which is a historical nonfiction piece, which means it's based on historical events, but it has made up characters or made up settings, something about it that makes it not true. Just like if you were watching the Titanic actually happened, but the movie The Titanic, those characters were made up and not the actual story of it did not occur. So, this is by Hannah Ingram. Though Sarah loved her parents, she began to worry as soon as she received word that her mother and father were coming to the farm for a visit. She hadn't told them the news about Elijah's estate, and she wondered how she would fit everyone at the table during mealtime. In truth, that problem was small compared to her other burdens, but she could do little to remove a single one. Sarah missed her husband Elijah terribly. Last winter, he had caught a chill and died from it. This left Sarah to manage the farm alone. She and her girls could have coped, but a few months ago, her stepson Brad had shown up at her door, court order in hand. He was laying claim to 2/3 of Elijah's farm, his rightful inheritance. Being a woman meant she was only entitled to 1/3 of her husband's property. Her stepson was kind enough to let her keep the cabin and a small plot of land for a garden. The rest of the farm would be sold. Sarah only hoped she could grow enough to feed her girls and find work in town. Just focusing on her parents' visit brought Sarah more heartache. It was unfair. As a widow, she was entitled to so little of Elijah's estate, and Brad had claimed most of the furniture, the extra plates, the silverware she'd received from her grandmother. She was left with 4 place settings and 4 chairs, just enough for herself and the girls for each meal. She had done some mending for Mr. Malloy with the intention of earning enough money to buy back the plates and a chair or two, but she'd had to spend the money on flour, sugar, and more pins. Sarah tidied the house nervously as she waited for her parents to arrive. The last time she had seen them, she recalled, Elijah was still alive. Soon she saw a distant cloud of dust from their wagon as it rolled up the road. The children ran behind it toward the house, and Sarah greeted her parents fondly. Setting aside her own worries, Sarah began chatting about family and friends. At last, the family sat down to eat. Sarah's 2 eldest girls withdrew quietly, knowing that they would eat later, so as to share their seats and place settings with their grandparents. As Sarah served the dinner she could ill afford, her mother watched her with concern. "Why aren't we all eating together, dear?" her mother asked. "What's on your mind?" Sarah hesitated, but she decided to tell the truth. "As a widow, I am only entitled to a few things Elijah and I once shared, and Elijah's son Brad has claimed the rest. That's why my home is so bare. We have so little now that Elijah is gone." Her father shook his head sadly. "What about the farm?" he asked. Sarah explained that Brad's court order allowed him to sell most of the land. As a woman, she wasn't legally entitled to keep it. "What a pity," her father said thoughtfully. "Nonsense," cried Sarah's mother. "This is just the problem that I've been describing these many years, Jebediah." Sarah's father cleared his throat, but her mother continued. "And you know how much I admire Lucy Stone's efforts to provide fair treatment to women." "Who is Lucy Stone?" Sarah asked, ignoring her father's frown. Her mother explained that Mrs. Stone had been speaking about women's rights for many years and was pushing to modify state laws. She also called for women to be allowed to pursue all professions and occupations. Her mother continued. Mrs. Stone even refused to take her husband's last name when she married him because she did not want to be considered anyone's property. And this woman is not alone in her fight. Women all over the country are working together so that they will no longer be mistreated as that you have been, Sarah. The women's rights movement is gaining support from many. For once your mother may have a point, observed her father, taking Sarah's hand to reassure her. You should have the right to what you and Elijah own together, Sarah. We will help you get back on your feet, and then we'll fight to get your farm back. Her mother nodded in agreement, then she added one last thought. Perhaps when more men and women add their voices to this movement, we will be able to improve the lives of all the women throughout the nation. Later, with stories of women like Lucy Stone in her head and her parents' reassurance, Sarah watched the dinner dishes with a smile on her face. For the first time in months, she could imagine a life for herself where she didn't have to live like a second-class citizen. As for her girls, what new doors of opportunity would this movement open for them? So now we're going to take a look at these questions, and like I said, you guys do have to do these on your own because this is an assessment, but I'll help walk you through the questions so that you can understand them a little bit better. So number 1 says, which statement best describes how the author has drawn an important fact from the speech to create a fictional story? So again, the first story is the speech from Lucy Stone. The second story is fiction, but it's historical fiction. So it mentions Lucy Stone, who is a real person in it, but it is a fictional story. So how does the author draw on an important fact from the first story to create a more fictional story? So the choices are, Lucy Stone speaks about the lack of equality for women, and Sarah experiences the problems it creates. Sarah, again, is the fictional person. Lucy Stone is the real person. B says Lucy Stone delivers a speech after they hear it, Sarah and her mother decide to join the women's movement. C, the speech is about social change and the story is about accepting things as they are. D, the speech is meant to persuade women and the story problem encourages a woman to fight for her own rights. So think about how the second story uses the true story of Lucy Stone to make a theme or something that you can draw from the story. Number 2 says, which historical detail from the speech is also included in the story? So a detail from the speech that is also in the historical fiction or the fake story. So it says, if a woman wrote a book, her husband owned the copyright. A widow usually inherited only a small part of her husband's estate. Married women had no legal rights and could not even sue someone. Married women did not have any right to raise their own children. So obviously all of these things were mentioned in the speech. But you need to look at which one was in the speech that was also in the story. So even though it says if a woman wrote a book, her husband owned the copyright, it says that in the speech, but does the story have anything to do with a woman writing a book and her husband owning the copyright? No. So we immediately know A is not one of our answers. So just look for something that's both in the speech and in the story. 3 says, which statement best describes how the author of A Widow's Burden altered historical facts to tell her story? So the Widow's Burden is our second story, our historical fiction. So how did she change the facts to tell the story? So what did she change that made it fiction? So A says, in reality, the problem of the inequalities experienced by Sarah could not be put right so easily. B, in reality, it would be difficult to prove that women had gained political power in less than 50 years. C, in reality, it's unlikely that one woman's speech would be powerful enough to encourage Sarah to agree with her parents. Or D, in reality, the women's movement did not improve the standard of living for women in the 1840s. So you need to tell which one is the changed fact that was put into the fictional story that was not in the speech. The last one, which is what we were really focusing on in our lesson from Thursday, is comparing and contrasting the details of the speech, which is the progress of 50 years, to those in the fictional story, A Widow's Burden. So describe how the author of A Widow's Burden has used and altered historical facts. Use at least 2 details from the text to support your answer. So again, we need to be using the RAY strategy, which is restate, answer, cite, and explain. So if we started out this answer, we could start out by saying, as always that we do with compare and contrast, we could say there are several similarities and differences between the progress of 50 years and A Widow's Burden. And then we could say one of those similarities is, and then tell me what one of the similarities is. Use evidence from the story to tell me what the similarity is, and then explain how that scene from the story or the detail from the story shows that they are similar. Then you're going to do the same thing with a difference. So you would say something from the story that's different, give evidence to cite how that's correct, and then explain how your evidence supports that conclusion. So this is your last question for today. We'll move on to 44 on Thursday. So if you guys have any questions, I'll be available in office hours today. But again, this is an assessment, so you guys need to answer these on your own. But if you need a little bit of extra help, just reach out to me then.